I wanted to spend a minute or two and talk about the fact that Tesla is a software company that builds cars. And there's a distinction in there that I think is important and relevant. Now, most other car companies, they tend to be car companies that think about software as kind of an afterthought, or really don't think about software at all and farm it out to someone else. Now, to be fair, there are a few other car companies that are making their way into the transition of becoming more software oriented. So when I think about the likes of the Kias and the General Motors and a few other companies, even some of the higher end cars, you can see that they're starting to think about software and take it more seriously. But what happens is, with most of the companies, they kind of have software as an afterthought. They build a car, then they go, yeah, we'll put some software in it. And whether that software is the software that runs the car, or whether it's some sort of infotainment system or navigation or anything else, it tends to be that the car itself really isn't that smart. When you think about how hard it is to diagnose a problem with a car, cars have had computers for 20 or more years now, and you still can't diagnose the problem with the car without putting some sort of scan tool to it, and then it gives you some sort of a code message. It's really not very software friendly in that sense. It's just running a piece of code that tells you something. And I find that kind of interesting. So Tesla really figured it out and said, hey, we're going to be a software company, and everything we're going to do is about the software. And the car itself, that's just a commodity. And why this comes top of mind to me, I was on a vacation recently, and I rented a Mazda CX-5. It's a nice sized car, and it drove fairly well. It wasn't anything great, maybe a little bit truck-like, but not particularly bad or anything. But I have to say that their user interface for the infotainment system that they had in the car was probably the worst I've ever seen. It's like they never even thought about the fact that they had to put something in the car. It was sort of an afterthought. Hey, we'll put in something that allows people to connect their phone and have a navigation system and this and that. And it was terrible. I mean, the interface was really clunky, and you had to click on different things to get somewhere. When I first got in the car, I was trying to put in an address, and I brought up the navigation system. I'm like, cool, it has a navigation system. I'll put in the address, and I start typing it in, and it says not found. And I'm like, well, I know this address exists. So I went ahead and started looking at it, and I'm like, oh, it has the wrong city. You have to have the city to tell it the address you want to go to? Okay, I backed up and tried to put the city in. Oh no, I can't put the city in because I have the state wrong. Wait, I have to put the state in to say what address I want to go to? What kind of navigation system is this? So you had to actually start by putting in the country, which was already in, then put in the state, then put in the city, then put in the street name, then put in the actual address number that you wanted to go to. So I'm like, click, 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 and there's no automatic anything that's finding anything. Now, I did find later that you could go to points of interest and type in something, and it would find a location that you were looking for, even if it was in a different city. So that was helpful in a way. But I also found that that was kind of kludgy, because at one point there was a destination I wanted to go to, and I didn't realize there were two of this same service, the same company in another town. So when I put it in, I saw that it came up, and I said, okay, great, I'm going there. And I went to the wrong address because I went to the other location, which was not the one I wanted to go to. I had some business at the one location, and I didn't realize they were about a mile away from each other. And it's kind of weird that a company has two locations like that in the same town, but even so, the fact is that it didn't give me the option of selecting a different one. It was just the one that came up by default. So anyway, the point is that the software was really hard to use, and there was nothing to it that was meaningful or useful. It wasn't very interesting. There was another quirky thing it did. It had some features on it where you could tap on it and zoom in and out and do some things, do the 2-dimensional versus 3-dimensional. But the problem was you could only use those when you were stopped. If the car was in motion, you couldn't touch the screen. The screen would not respond to you in any way if you were moving. What kind of a system is that? My son was with me in the car. We needed to adjust the navigation at some point. We're on twisty, windy, country-like roads where there's nowhere to pull off, nowhere to stop, and we can't change the navigation at all. We had zoomed in at one point and started driving, couldn't zoom back out to see where we were going. It was ridiculous. And the navigation was okay. It was an early version of a navigation system, something you might have seen 15 or 20 years ago. And sometimes the GPS cut out. We had some issues with connecting to satellites or whatever. And sometimes it was there. So we wound up resorting to the phone at times when we really wanted to find what we were looking for. It's kind of weird. It was just like, why don't they think this through? This is 2022. Why haven't they just considered what you do when you drive and how you actually drive the car? It was kind of strange, but that's the point, that they're a car company first and a software company as an afterthought. And that's kind of the issue. And that brings me around to an interesting article I read about Apple's CarPlay system and how they have come up with a new CarPlay system that effectively takes over the entirety of your car's computer system. It's very invasive in a way. So your dash controls, your navigation system, all of these things, it basically inserts itself and overrides all of the features that the car company put in and puts in its own sort of user interface to it. It's still reading information from the car, it's still giving you some things, but it's giving you an Apple-designed user interface for the entirety of the car's systems, which I find kind of interesting. And if you think about it, you could theoretically customize what's on the screen, you could move things around if you wanted to, that kind of thing. So I think the paradigm has shifted, that we're thinking about cars as car companies, software as software companies, and the two maybe don't meet. For the companies that don't figure it out, the ones that really don't have it kind of worked out in their heads and how they want to do it, and they're not thinking about the software, Apple and probably Google, and I would think other companies will step into that space and start to create software for cars without actually creating the cars. The cars then become the commodity, and the software becomes more important. And that's where I find it interesting that the entirety of the paradigm will shift that way, that we now start thinking about cars as cars, just cars, and all of the software, all of the infotainment, all of the information that you're getting back will be run by some software company. So if a car like Tesla gets it and has it working out the way you would think, where it integrates itself, that's great. But if the car company doesn't, you'll have options in order to make it work the way you want to. So I just find the whole thing really, really interesting. And I think that it's worth thinking about a little bit and considering, because software companies do things differently than car companies do. And I think it's time for car companies to change sort of the way they think about things. If you look at, GM is redesigning their car from the ground up, and they figured out that they need to change the way they think about cars. And they're kind of redoing the entirety of their car system. So they're going to come up with software. Ford is rethinking a lot of their car systems in terms of the electric cars. And I think they're going to have new systems in their cars as well. But some of these other car companies haven't quite figured that out yet. And it's going to be interesting to see what they do and how they respond to these other things. Oh, and by the way, one of the things about using like Apple CarPlay or one of these other tools is that they allow for updates in your car. That CX-5 that I was driving, if I needed to update the software in it, I would have to take it somewhere and have the software updated, take it to a dealership and have it updated. How does that work? I mean, it's software. Why can't you do that over the air? Why do I have to go somewhere and plug it in to be able to do an update? That's kind of strange. So I think the car industry is going through a revolution right now, and I don't think everyone quite sees it yet. When you think about what's happening, you look at Dodge announced that they're not going to produce the Challenger or the Charger anymore. And those are very gas-intensive cars. They're muscle cars, though. But what happens to the muscle car industry? I guess we adapt and it changes, and there's no more muscle car industry as we know it today. But I have heard about aftermarket things you can put even on a Tesla that will allow it to run in a way that gives you the rumble and that sort of feeling like you're driving a muscle car. So I assume that car companies will figure this out too, and that will become another software thing, right? It's going to become more software oriented in that sense, where if you want your car to do something specific, it can. So I find it really interesting. We'll see where it all nets out, but I think there's some cool things coming, and I just wanted to share that with you because I thought that was really kind of weird and unusual and kind of neat in a way.